The letter arrived on the first snow of the season, carried by a messenger who refused to dismount and spat in the mud near Grushka's feet before riding away. She stood at the edge of the fallow field, the parchment heavy in her calloused hands, reading the blocky runes her brother had carved into the hide. The message was simple and brutal. Return to the clan before the winter solstice, or be declared kinless, nameless, stripped of blood and honor. She would be nothing, not even a ghost to be mourned when her spirit finally wandered into the dark. Her mother had signed it too, her mark shaky but unmistakable. That hurt worse than any threat. Grushka folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her belt, her breath misting in the cold air. Behind her, smoke rose from the chimney of the small farmhouse where she had spent the last 8 months, where she had found something she had never expected to find among humans. Peace, maybe even happiness, though she hardly dared name it that. She turned and walked back toward the house, her boots crunching through the frost-brittle grass. The farm was modest, barely 20 acres of arable land carved out of the frontier wilderness, with a barn that leaned slightly to the left and a root cellar that flooded when the rains came heavy. But Xander had built it with his own hands after the war, and there was a stubborn beauty in everything he touched. She had learned that about him. He was splitting wood when she rounded the barn, his breath coming in steady clouds as the axe rose and fell with practiced rhythm. Xander Halstead was not a large man by Orc standards, but he was broad across the shoulders and strong in the quiet, enduring way of men who worked the land. His hair was the color of autumn wheat, and his eyes were a startling blue that had unnerved her the first time they met. Now those eyes made her chest feel tight in ways she could not explain. He looked up as she approached and rested the axe against the chopping block. "Letter from home?" "Yes," she did not elaborate. He did not press. That was another thing she had learned about him. He gave her space when she needed it, but he never turned away. "Soup's on if you're hungry," he said, wiping his brow with the back of one hand. "Made that bean and ham recipe you liked. You did not have to do that. I know." He smiled, small and crooked. "Wanted to." She followed him inside, where the warmth of the hearth wrapped around her like an embrace. The house smelled of wood smoke and herbs, of bread baking and the faint tang of the oil he used on his tools. It smelled like home, which was a dangerous thing to think. They ate in companionable silence at the scarred wooden table he had salvaged from an abandoned homestead down the road. The soup was good, rich and filling, and she ate 2 bowls before she realized he was watching her with that expression he got sometimes. The one that made her wonder what he was thinking, what he saw when he looked at her. "Grushka," he said finally, setting down his spoon. "If something's wrong, you can tell me. You know that, right?" She stared into her bowl at the bits of ham and carrot floating in the broth. "My clan wants me to return before the solstice. That's only 3 weeks away, I know. And if you don't go, I am cast out, exiled in truth, not just in distance." She made herself meet his gaze. "They will declare me kinless. No orc will speak to me or acknowledge me. I will have no clan, no name, no place among my people." He was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him working through the implications, his jaw tight. "What do you want to do?" It was such a simple question, and it cut her to the bone. What did she want? She had fled her clan 8 months ago because she could no longer bear the endless raiding, the casual cruelty toward human settlers, the way her kin treated violence as the only language worth speaking. She had been called weak, soft, corrupted by mercy. When she had refused to participate in an attack on a farming village, her brother had struck her across the face and told her she dishonored their blood. She had left that night with nothing but her axe and the clothes on her back, expecting to die alone in the wilderness. Instead, she had stumbled onto Xander's farm, half-starved and feverish from an infected wound. He should have killed her. She had been prepared for it. Instead, he had brought her inside, cleaned and stitched the gash on her arm, and fed her soup much like the one they were eating now. "Why are you helping me?" she had asked when the fever finally broke. He had looked at her with those blue eyes, clear and calm. "Because you needed help. Doesn't seem complicated." She had stayed to repay the debt. That was what she told herself, at least. She worked the farm, hauling water and mending fences and harvesting the last of the autumn vegetables. She hunted game in the forest and taught him how to cure the meat so it would last through the winter. He taught her to read common script and shared his small collection of books with her. At night, they sat by the fire and talked about everything and nothing, and she found herself laughing more than she had in years. Somewhere along the way, repaying a debt had become something else. Something she did not have a name for, but that lived in her chest like a small, fierce flame. "I want to stay," she said quietly, "but I do not know if I can." Xander reached across the table and laid his hand over hers. His palm was warm, the skin rough from work, and the touch sent a shiver up her arm. "Then we'll figure it out, together." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that it could be that simple, that she could choose this life and leave the past behind. But she knew her people. Knew that if she defied the summons, they might come for her. And if they did, Xander would be caught in the middle. That night, she lay awake in the small loft where she slept, listening to the wind howl around the eaves and the creak of the house settling. Below, she could hear Xander moving around, banking the fire and bolting the door. She thought about the letter in her belt, about the choice that loomed like a storm on the horizon. She thought about going home and trying to explain herself, trying to make them understand why she could not be what they wanted her to be. But she knew it would be useless. Her clan valued strength and loyalty above all else, and to them, she had shown neither. She had abandoned them in the middle of a war against the human settlers who encroached on their territory. That was unforgivable. And yet, the thought of leaving Xander made her chest ache in ways she did not know how to process. She had never felt this way about anyone, not the warriors who had courted her with displays of strength and trophies of battle. Not the hunters who had offered her meat and pelts and promises of fierce children. Xander was different. He did not try to prove anything to her. He simply existed, steady and kind, and made space for her to exist beside him. The days that followed were tense, though Xander tried to keep things normal. They worked the farm as they always did, preparing for the winter. He showed her how to insulate the barn and reinforce the shutters against the storms that would come. She taught him a few words of the Orcish tongue, laughing when he mangled the pronunciation, and he retaliated by teaching her a bawdy human drinking song that made her ears burn. But the weight of the letter hung between them, unspoken and heavy. One evening, a week before the solstice, they were sitting by the fire when Xander finally broke the silence. "Tell me about your clan." She glanced at him, surprised. He rarely asked about her past, sensing perhaps that it was painful for her to revisit. But now he watched her with an openness that made it impossible to deflect. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me." She stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. "I was born in the Ironjaw clan in the mountains to the north. My father was a war chief and my mother was a healer. They had high hopes for me. I was strong, good with an axe, and I could track and hunt better than most of the warriors. Sounds like you were valued. I was, until I started questioning things." She picked at a loose thread on her tunic. "The war with the human settlers has been going on for as long as I can remember. My people see you as invaders, thieves who take land that does not belong to you, and in some ways they are right. But the killing never stops. The raids, the burnings, the children left orphaned on both sides. I grew tired of it, so you left." "Not at first. I tried to speak out to suggest another way, but my clan does not value words. They value action, and the only action they respect is violence. She flexed her hands, remembering the weight of the axe, the way it felt to strike and know you had taken a life. When I refused to raid that village, my brother called me a coward. He said I had been corrupted by weakness, that I was a shame to our bloodline. So I left before they could cast me out themselves. Xander was quiet for a moment, then said, "That must have taken a lot of courage." She laughed bitterly. "Courage? I ran away, Xander. I abandoned my people because I could not stomach what they wanted me to do. That's not running away. That's standing by your principles, even when it costs you everything." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "And for what it's worth, I'm glad you did. If you hadn't, we never would have met." Her breath caught. She wanted to say something, to put into words the tangle of emotions that churned inside her, but the words would not come. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. He squeezed back, and they sat like that until the fire burned low and the night grew cold. The next day, a rider came to the farm. Grushka saw him from the field where she was mending a section of fence and felt her stomach drop. He was orc, his skin a deep green and his tusks carved with the marks of a clan messenger. He rode a massive black warhorse, its breath steaming in the cold air, and he looked at the farmhouse with open contempt. Xander was in the barn, but he must have heard the hoofbeats because he emerged a moment later, a pitchfork in his hands. Not a weapon, exactly, but not harmless either. Grushka appreciated the precaution. She walked toward the rider, her heart pounding. "Why are you here, Drothar?" The orc dismounted with a grunt, his armor clinking. "I bring a second message from the clan. Your brother asked me to deliver it personally." He held out a rolled piece of hide, and she took it with reluctant fingers. The message was even shorter than the first. If she did not return, they would come for her. They would drag her back in chains if necessary, or they would kill her for her betrayal. There would be no third warning. "You have made a fool of yourself, Grushka," Drothar said, his voice low and hard. "Living among humans like a tame dog, the clan is generous to offer you a chance to return. Do not squander it." "I will consider their offer," she said, keeping her voice even. "Consider." Drothar stepped closer, looming over her. "There is nothing to consider. You are Ironjaw. You belong with your people, not with this soft-skinned farmer who will cast you aside the moment you become inconvenient. That's enough." Xander's voice was calm but firm as he stepped up beside Grushka, the pitchfork still in his hands. "You've delivered your message. Now leave." Drothar's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Grushka thought he might attack, but then he sneered and spat at Xander's feet. "Keep your human pet, Grushka. But know that when the clan comes, he will die first, and you will watch." He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Grushka standing in the cold with her heart in her throat. "Grushka," Xander said quietly, "what are you going to do?" She looked at him, at the concern in his eyes, the worry etched into the lines of his face. He was afraid, she realized, not for himself but for her, and that broke something open inside her. "I am not going back," she said. He let out a breath, relief and fear mingling in his expression. "Then we need to prepare. If they're coming, we need to be ready." "Xander, you do not understand. If they come, they will not stop until I am dead or taken, and they will kill you without hesitation. You should leave, find safety somewhere else." "Absolutely not. You are being foolish." "Maybe." He set the pitchfork aside and took her hands in his grip warm and steady. "But I'm not leaving you to face them alone. We're in this together, remember?" She wanted to argue, to push him away for his own safety. But the truth was, she did not want to face this alone. She had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of her choices and her exile. The thought of having someone beside her, someone who believed in her, was almost too much to bear. Why do you care so much? She asked, her voice breaking. I am Orc. I am everything your people fear and hate. Why would you risk your life for me? He reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing against the sharp edges of her tusks. Because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, and I don't care what anyone else thinks about it. The world seemed to stop. She stared at him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. No one had ever said those words to her. No one had ever looked at her the way he was looking at her now, like she was something precious and worth fighting for. Xander, she whispered. I do not know if I can be what you need. I do not know how to be gentle or soft. I am a warrior and I have done terrible things. I don't need you to be anything other than who you are, he said. And I've done terrible things too. I fought in the war, Grushka. I killed people. Orcs, probably some from your clan. I'm not innocent and I'm not asking you to be either. I'm just asking you to stay. She closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the force of her emotions. Then, slowly, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. It was an orcish gesture of trust, of intimacy, and he seemed to understand because he went very still, his breath warm against her skin. I will stay, she said, and I will fight for this, for us. They spent the next week preparing. Xander had been a soldier once before he bought the farm, and he knew how to fortify a position. They reinforced the doors and shutters, stockpiled food and water in the root cellar, and laid traps in the woods around the property. Grushka sharpened her axe and taught Xander a few basic orcish combat techniques, though she prayed they would not need them. At night, they talked about the future, about what they would do if they survived. Xander wanted to expand the farm, maybe buy some sheep and start a flock. Grushka admitted, hesitantly, that she had always wanted to learn to read and write properly, to maybe keep a record of her thoughts and the things she had seen. He promised to teach her, and the thought of sitting by the fire with him, learning to shape letters on parchment, filled her with a warmth she had never known. The solstice came and went, and for a few days, Grushka allowed herself to hope that maybe the clan had decided she was not worth the effort. But on the third night after the solstice, she woke to the sound of hoofbeats and the acrid smell of smoke. She bolted upright, grabbing her axe from where it leaned against the wall. Below, she heard Xander moving, shouting her name. She scrambled down the ladder from the loft and found him at the window, his face pale in the flickering light of the flames outside. They're here, he said. She looked out and felt her blood run cold. There were at least a dozen orcs surrounding the property, their armor gleaming in the firelight. They had set the barn ablaze, and the flames were already leaping toward the house. At the head of the group, she recognized her brother Krogr, his massive frame unmistakable even in the dark. Grushka, he roared. Come out and face your judgment. She met Xander's eyes, and she saw the same determination reflected there. Stay behind me, she said. If things go badly, run for the woods and do not look back. Not a chance. She wanted to argue, but there was no time. She threw open the door and stepped out into the cold night, her axe in her hands. Krogr dismounted and strode toward her, his own weapon, a massive two-handed maul resting on his shoulder. So you defy us to the end. I should have known. I am not coming back, Krogr. I have found a new life here and I will not give it up, he laughed, a harsh, grating sound. A new life. With a human. You disgrace yourself, sister. You disgrace our blood. The only disgrace is the endless cycle of violence you perpetuate, she shot back. I am tired of killing, tired of the war. There has to be another way. There is no other way. The humans take, and we must fight or be destroyed. He gestured to the burning barn. And now you stand with them against your own people. That is the ultimate betrayal. Then I am a traitor, she said, her voice steady, but I will not regret it. Krogger's expression darkened and he raised his maul. So be it. You will die here with your human lover and your name will be forgotten. Grushka stepped forward, her axe ready, but before she could strike, Xander moved past her. He held a bow, one she had not realized he had retrieved, and he had an arrow nocked and aimed at Krogger's chest. "Stop," Xander said. "This doesn't have to end in blood." Krogger turned his gaze to Xander, and Grushka saw the contempt in her brother's eyes. "A human dares to threaten me." "You are nothing, little man. You will die first and your woman will watch." "Maybe," Xander said, "but I'm a pretty good shot and I guarantee I'll take you with me." For a moment, no one moved. The air was thick with tension, the only sound the crackle of the flames consuming the barn. Grushka's mind raced. She could not let Xander die for her. She could not let this end in a slaughter. "Krogger," she said, stepping between them. "Let me make you an offer. Single combat. You and me. If I win, you leave and never return. If you win, you can do what you want with me. But you leave Xander out of this." Krogger considered, his gaze flicking between her and Xander. Then he grinned, showing his tusks. "Very well. I accept your challenge, though it will be a short fight, sister. You were always too soft." She handed Xander her axe and picked up a stout piece of wood from the pile near the house. It was not much, but it would have to do. She could not risk using her weapon against her brother. If she killed him, the clan would never stop hunting her. They faced each other in the firelight, the other orcs forming a loose circle around them. Grushka's heart pounded, but her mind was clear. She had trained for this her entire life. She knew how Krogger fought, knew his strengths and weaknesses. He was strong and brutal, but he was also overconfident. He charged with a roar, his maul swinging in a wide arc. She ducked under the blow and struck at his knee with the wood, feeling the satisfying crack of impact. He grunted and stumbled, but he recovered quickly, spinning and bringing the maul down in a vertical strike. She rolled to the side, the weapon slamming into the ground where she had been standing. They traded blows, the fight brutal and exhausting. Krogger's strength was overwhelming, and every hit that connected sent shockwaves through her body. But she was faster, more agile, and she used that to her advantage. She dodged and weaved, striking at his joints and weak points, wearing him down inch by inch. Finally, she saw her opening. He overextended on a swing, and she lunged forward, driving the wood into his solar plexus. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, and she pressed the makeshift weapon against his throat. "Yield," she said, her voice hard. For a long moment he glared at her, fury and disbelief warring in his eyes. Then, slowly, he lowered his head. "I yield." She stepped back, breathing hard, and looked at the other orcs. "You heard him. The challenge is over. Leave, now." To her surprise, they obeyed. One by one, they mounted their horses and rode away, leaving Krogger kneeling in the dirt. He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw something other than anger in his face. Respect, maybe, or regret. "You have changed, Grushka," he said quietly. "I do not understand it, but I see that you have found something worth fighting for. I hope it is enough." "So do I," she said. He rose to his feet, clutching his chest, and walked to his horse. Before he mounted, he turned back to her. "You are no longer Ironjaw, but you are still my sister. Remember that." Then he was gone, and the clearing was silent except for the crackle of the dying fire. Grushka turned to find Xander standing behind her, his face pale but his eyes bright. "Are you hurt, bruised?" she said. "But I will live." He dropped the bow and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she thought her ribs might crack. She wrapped her arms around him and buried her face in his shoulder, letting the fear and adrenaline finally drain away. "I thought I was going to lose you," he said, his voice rough. "You did not. I am here." They stood like that for a long time, clinging to each other in the firelight. Then, slowly, they pulled apart and surveyed the damage. The barn was a total loss, but the house was intact. They would have to rebuild, but they would do it together. Over the next few weeks, they worked to repair the farm. Neighbors, human settlers who had heard about the attack, came to help. Grushka was wary at first, expecting hostility or fear, but instead she found curiosity and cautious acceptance. One woman, a widow named Eliza, even brought her a basket of bread and preserves as a welcome gift. "I heard what you did," Eliza said. "Standing up to your own people to protect Xander, that takes guts. We could use more folks like you around here." Grushka did not know what to say, so she simply nodded and accepted the gift. But the words stayed with her, warming her from the inside out. Winter deepened, and the farm settled into a quiet rhythm. Xander taught her to read and write, and she proved to be an eager student. She kept a journal, recording her thoughts and observations, and sometimes she would read passages aloud to him by the fire. He always listened with rapt attention, even when her words were clumsy or halting. One evening, as the snow fell thick and fast outside, Xander set aside the book he was reading and looked at her with a seriousness that made her pulse quicken. "Grushka," he said, "I have something I want to ask you." She set down her quill and turned to face him. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved wooden ring. It was simple, unadorned but beautiful in its simplicity. "I know this is probably crazy, and I know we come from different worlds, but I can't imagine my life without you anymore. So I'm asking, will you marry me?" Her breath caught. Marriage. Among orcs, bonding was a matter of strength and alliance, a practical arrangement to produce strong children and maintain clan ties. But among humans, she knew, it was something more. A promise, a commitment, a declaration of love. She looked at the ring, then at Xander, and felt tears prick her eyes. "Are you certain? Your people will not accept this easily. You will be an outcast like me." "I don't care what other people think," he said. "I care about you. I love you, Grushka. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." She took the ring from his hand and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." He laughed, a sound of pure joy, and pulled her into a kiss that left her breathless. She wrapped her arms around him and kissed him back, pouring all of her love and gratitude and hope into that single moment. They were married in the spring, in a simple ceremony in the clearing behind the house. Eliza and a few other neighbors attended, along with the local magistrate who had agreed to officiate. It was not a grand affair, but it was perfect. Grushka wore a dress that Eliza had helped her sew, a simple green gown that made her feel both strange and beautiful. Xander wore his best shirt and a nervous smile that made her heart ache with tenderness. When the magistrate asked if she would take Xander as her husband, she did not hesitate. "I will." And when he asked Xander the same, he looked at her with those clear blue eyes and said, "I will. Always." They exchanged rings, and the magistrate pronounced them married. The small crowd cheered, and Eliza dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Grushka felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. She had chosen this. She had taken Xander's hand and built a new life, and despite everything, it had worked. That night, they lay together in the loft, the windows open to let in the cool spring breeze. Xander traced patterns on her arm, his touch gentle and reverent, and she leaned into him, feeling safe and cherished. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Leaving your clan, giving up everything you knew?" She thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about her family, her brother and mother and the warriors she had trained with. She thought about the mountains and the traditions and the fierce pride of her people. And then she thought about the endless cycle of violence, the raids and the bloodshed and the emptiness of a life defined only by war. "No," she said, "I do not regret it. This is where I belong." He kissed the top of her head, and she closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his presence wash over her. She had been told she would be nothing if she left her clan, but she had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found love and purpose and a home. The seasons turned, and their life together grew richer. They expanded the farm, adding a new barn and a chicken coop, and Grushka proved to have a knack for raising livestock. She also became something of a protector for the small community, using her skills to help track down predators and defend against bandits. The settlers who had once feared her began to trust her, and she earned a reputation as someone who could be counted on in a crisis. Xander continued to farm, and he also began teaching her more advanced reading and writing. She devoured every book he had, and when she ran out, he borrowed more from the neighbors. She was particularly fascinated by histories and tales of faraway places, and she often talked about traveling one day, seeing the world beyond the frontier. "Maybe we will," Xander said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "When we're old and gray and the farm is running itself." She laughed, a sound that came more easily now. "I will hold you to that." 2 years after they were married, Grushka received another letter. This one was not from her clan, but from her mother. It was short and written in a shaky hand, but the words were clear. Her mother was dying, and she wanted to see Grushka one last time. Grushka stared at the letter, her heart aching. She had made peace with her exile, with the loss of her family. But the thought of her mother dying without saying goodbye was almost unbearable. "I have to go," she said to Xander. "I know it is dangerous, but I have to see her." He did not argue. He simply nodded and said, "Then I'm coming with you." They traveled north, into the mountains where the Ironjaw clan made their home. It was a journey fraught with danger, and they moved carefully, avoiding orc patrols and staying off the main trails. When they finally reached the clan's settlement, Grushka felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with fear. The place looked the same, the rough-hewn longhouses and the smell of wood smoke and forge fires. But she was not the same person who had left. They were met at the edge of the settlement by an old warrior named Grath, who had been a friend of her father's. He looked surprised to see her, and even more surprised to see Xander, but he did not raise an alarm. "Your mother has been asking for you," he said gruffly. "She does not have long." He led them to a small longhouse at the edge of the settlement, where her mother lay on a bed of furs. She looked frail, her once strong body wasted by illness, but her eyes were still sharp. "Grushka," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "you came." "Of course I came." Grushka knelt beside the bed and took her mother's hand. "I could not let you go without saying goodbye." Her mother's gaze shifted to Xander, who stood respectfully near the door. "This is the human you chose." "Yes, this is Xander, my husband." Her mother studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "He has kind eyes. That is rare in this world." "He is a good man," Grushka said. "The best I have ever known." Her mother squeezed her hand weakly. "I was angry when you left. I thought you had betrayed us, abandoned your duty. But I see now that you were braver than I gave you credit for. You chose your own path, even when it cost you everything." Tears streamed down Grushka's face. "I am sorry, Mother. I never wanted to hurt you." "I know, child. And I am sorry, too. Sorry that we could not be what you needed, that we could not see beyond our own anger and fear." She coughed, a rattling sound, and Grushka felt her heart clench. "Promise me something, anything. Promise me you will be happy, that you will build a life worth living, and that you will not let the past define you." "I promise," Grushka whispered. Her mother smiled, a small, tired smile, and closed her eyes. "Then I can rest." She passed an hour later with Grushka holding her hand. They buried her in the clan's ancestral grove, and Krogr, who had become the war chief in the years since Grushka left, allowed her to participate in the rites. It was a small mercy, but it meant the world to her. Before they left, Krogr pulled her aside. "You are still exiled," he said. "That has not changed, but you are my sister and you always will be. If you ever need help, send word, I will come." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Then she and Xander left, traveling back to the farm that had become their true home. The journey back was long, but it gave them time to talk, to process the grief and the strange sense of closure that came with her mother's death. Xander held her when she cried, and he listened when she needed to talk, and he was simply there, steady and unshakable. When they finally reached the farm, Grushka felt a sense of relief so profound it brought fresh tears to her eyes. This was home. This small patch of land, with its rebuilt barn and its sturdy little house, was where she belonged. Over the next few years, their life continued to grow and evolve. Grushka became a respected member of the community, and she and Xander became known as the couple who proved that love could bridge even the widest divides. They faced challenges, of course. There were settlers who still viewed her with suspicion, and there were occasional skirmishes with orc raiding parties. But they faced everything together, and they never wavered in their commitment to each other. One spring morning, 5 years after they were married, Grushka woke to find Xander already up and working in the garden. She watched him from the window, admiring the way the sunlight caught in his hair, the way he moved with easy confidence. He had aged in the years they had been together, fine lines appearing at the corners of his eyes, but to her, he had never been more handsome. She went outside and wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "Good morning." "Good morning," he said, turning to kiss her. "Sleep well?" "Very well." She paused, then said, "I have something to tell you." He turned to face her fully, his expression curious. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "I am with child." His eyes widened, and for a moment he was utterly still. Then a slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. "Are you serious?" "Yes, I am certain." He let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. When he finally set her down, his eyes were bright with tears. "We're going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We're going to be parents." "Yes," she said, her own eyes stinging. "We are." The pregnancy was not easy. Grushka's orcish physiology made carrying a half-human child complicated, and there were moments when she feared for both herself and the baby. But Eliza, who had experience as a midwife, helped her through the difficult months, and Xander was a constant source of support and reassurance. When the baby finally came on a cold winter night, it was the most terrifying and beautiful experience of Grushka's life. The labor was long and painful, but when she finally held her daughter in her arms, all of the fear and pain melted away. The baby was perfect. She had Grushka's green skin and pointed ears, but her eyes were Xander's clear blue, and her tusks were barely visible, small and delicate. She was a bridge between two worlds, a living testament to the love that had brought her into being. They named her Vara, after Xander's grandmother, and she became the center of their world. Grushka had never imagined herself as a mother, but she took to it with a fierceness that surprised even her. She was protective and patient, teaching Vara to be strong but also kind, to value both her orcish and human heritage. Xander was a devoted father, doting on Vara and spending hours playing with her, teaching her to read and showing her how to plant seeds in the garden. Watching them together filled Grushka with a joy so profound, it sometimes overwhelmed her. Vara grew quickly, as orcish children do, and she was strong and curious and full of life. She had her father's gentle nature and her mother's determination, and she charmed everyone she met. The neighbors adored her, and even the most skeptical settlers found it hard to resist her bright smile and infectious laughter. One afternoon, when Vara was 3 years old, she came running to Grushka with a question that made her mother's heart clench. "Mama, why do I look different from the other children?" Grushka knelt down and cupped her daughter's face in her hands. "Because you are special, little one. You are part orc and part human, and that makes you unique. You carry the best of both worlds inside you." "But some of the other children say I am strange," Vara said, her lower lip trembling. "People fear what they do not understand," Grushka said gently. "But you are not strange. You are beautiful and strong and kind, and anyone who cannot see that is missing out." Xander, who had been listening from the doorway, came over and scooped Vara into his arms. "Your mama is right. And besides, being different is what makes you special. You're going to do amazing things, Vara. I just know it." Vara nodded, her spirits lifting, and Grushka felt a surge of love for her little family. They were not traditional, and they faced challenges that others did not, but they were happy. And that was all that mattered. As the years passed, their farm became a gathering place for those who believed in the possibility of peace between orcs and humans. Other mixed families began to settle in the area, drawn by the example Grushka and Xander had set. It was not a large movement, but it was a start, and it gave Grushka hope for the future. One summer evening, when Vara was 7 years old, Grushka and Xander sat on the porch, watching their daughter play in the yard. She was chasing fireflies, her laughter ringing out in the warm air, and the sight filled Grushka with a contentment she had never thought possible. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if you had gone back to your clan?" Xander asked. Grushka considered the question. "Sometimes, but not with regret. I think I would have been miserable trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. Here I am free to be who I am, and I have you and Vara and a life that is truly mine." He reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "I'm glad you chose this, chose us." "So am I," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "So am I." The sun set slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Grushka felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She had been told that leaving her clan would make her nothing, that she would lose everything that defined her. But in reality, she had gained so much more. She had found love and family and a place where she truly belonged. The clan had said come home or be nothing. But Grushka had taken the farmer's hand instead, and in doing so, she had found everything. The years continued to unfold with a gentle rhythm that Grushka had never imagined possible. Vara grew into a bright and capable young girl, her mixed heritage a source of pride rather than shame. She learned to read and write from her father, and she learned to track and hunt from her mother. She was equally at home in the garden and the forest, and she had a natural gift for bringing people together. When Vara was 10, she asked if she could visit her mother's homeland. Grushka was hesitant at first, afraid of how her daughter might be received, but Xander encouraged her to consider it. "She should know where she comes from," he said. "Both sides of her heritage, and maybe it is time to see if things have changed." So they made the journey north once more, this time as a family. Krogr, now older and bearing the scars of many battles, greeted them with cautious warmth. He looked at Vara with undisguised curiosity, and Grushka braced herself for judgment. But instead, Krogr smiled. "She has your spirit, sister, and her father's kindness. A rare combination." He allowed them to stay for a few days, and Vara was fascinated by everything. She listened to the clan stories, watched the warriors train, and asked endless questions. Grushka was surprised by how many of the younger orcs were curious about her life among humans, how many asked if there might be a way to end the conflict. "Things are changing," Krogr told her on their last night. Slowly, but they are changing. Your choice to leave to build a different life, it has made some of us think, made us wonder if there might be another path. I hope there is, Grushka said. For Vara's sake, if nothing else. She should not have to grow up in a world where half of her identity is seen as the enemy. Perhaps she will be the one to bridge the divide, Krogger said thoughtfully. She has the strength of both our peoples. That is a powerful thing. When they returned home, Vara talked endlessly about her trip, about the orcs she had met and the stories she had heard. She seemed more confident, more secure in who she was, and Grushka was grateful for that. 2 years later, when a group of human settlers clashed with an orc hunting party near the farm, it was Vara who stepped in to mediate. She spoke both languages fluently, and she used that gift to help the two groups understand each other's perspectives. The conflict was resolved without bloodshed, and both sides came away with a new respect for the girl who refused to see them as enemies. Word of Vara's actions spread, and she became something of a local legend. People began to call her the bridge builder, and she wore the title with pride. Grushka and Xander watched with awe as their daughter became the very thing they had hoped for. A symbol of what was possible when love and understanding triumphed over fear and hatred. On Vara's 15th birthday, Grushka gave her a gift, a journal, bound in leather and filled with blank pages. "Write your story," she said. "Write about who you are, where you come from, and where you are going. Your words have power, Vara. Use them to change the world." Vara hugged her mother tightly, tears in her eyes. "I will, Mama, I promise." That evening, as they celebrated with neighbors and friends, Grushka stood beside Xander and looked out at the gathering. There were humans and orcs, families of all kinds, united by a common desire for peace and understanding. It was not perfect, and there were still those who clung to old prejudices, but it was progress and it was real. "We did this," Xander said quietly, his arm around her waist. "We started something that is bigger than us." "We took a chance," Grushka corrected. "We chose love over fear." Everything else followed from that. He kissed her temple and she leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. They had been through so much together, faced so many challenges, but they had never wavered, never given up on each other or the life they were building. As the night wore on and the celebration continued, Grushka felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought about the letter that had arrived all those years ago, the ultimatum that had forced her to make a choice. At the time, it had felt like the end of everything. But in reality, it had been the beginning. The clan had said, "Come home or be nothing." But Grushka had taken the farmer's hand instead, and in doing so, she had become everything she was meant to be. A wife, a mother, a pioneer. A woman who had chosen her own path and built a life worth living. And as she stood there, surrounded by the people she loved, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. She had found her home, not in the mountains where she was born, but here, on this small farm on the frontier, with the man who had seen past her tusks and her green skin to the person she truly was. The future stretched out before them, full of possibility and promise. There would be challenges, of course. There always were, but they would face them together as they always had. And whatever came, Grushka knew they would endure, because love, she had learned, was the strongest force in any world. It could bridge divides, heal wounds, and transform enemies into allies. It could take a lost, exiled orc woman and give her a family, a purpose, a reason to hope. And it all started with a simple choice: to take the farmer's hand and step into the unknown. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the life Grushka and Xander had built. The farm prospered, becoming a model for others in the region. They added more land, diversified their crops, and even began breeding horses, combining Grushka's knowledge of orcish animal husbandry with Xander's methodical approach to farming. Vara grew into a remarkable young woman, known throughout the frontier for her diplomatic skills and her fierce commitment to peace. By the time she was 18, she had brokered several treaties between human settlements and orc clans, preventing countless conflicts. She had also fallen in love with a young human man named Marcus, a blacksmith's son from the neighboring town, and their courtship was a source of joy for both families. Grushka watched her daughter's happiness with a full heart, seeing in Vara the fulfillment of every hope she had carried when she first left her clan. Vara had never had to choose between her orcish and human heritage. She embraced both fully, and in doing so, she had become stronger than either alone. On the day of Vara's wedding, Grushka stood beside her daughter and helped her dress. Vara wore a gown that incorporated both human and orcish traditions, with intricate embroidery and beadwork that told the story of her family. She was radiant, her green skin glowing with health and happiness, her tusks adorned with silver caps that had belonged to Grushka's mother. "Are you nervous?" Grushka asked, adjusting the veil. "A little," Vara admitted. "But mostly I am excited. Marcus is wonderful, Mama. He sees me for who I am, just like Papa saw you." Grushka's eyes misted. "That is all I ever wanted for you. To find someone who loves you completely, without reservation." Vara turned and embraced her mother. "Thank you for showing me what that looks like. Thank you for choosing love, even when it was hard. You gave me a life I could never have imagined." The wedding was a beautiful affair, attended by humans and orcs alike. Krogr came, bringing with him a delegation from the Ironjaw clan. He had aged considerably, his once powerful frame stooped with the weight of years, but his eyes were still sharp and intelligent. He approached Grushka during the reception, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Then he said, "You were right, sister. There was another way, and you found it." "We found it together," Grushka said, gesturing to the gathering around them. "All of us, human and orc. We chose to see past our differences." Krogr nodded slowly. "The war is not over. There is still much fear and hatred on both sides, but thanks to you and to Vara, there is also hope. That is more than we had before." They spoke for a while longer, and when Krogr left, Grushka felt as though another chapter of her past had finally closed. She was no longer defined by what she had lost when she left her clan. She was defined by what she had built in the years since. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Xander found her standing alone on the edge of the gathering, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "About how far we have come," she said. "About how different my life is from what I ever expected. Do you miss it? The life you might have had?" She turned to look at him, this man who had changed everything. His hair was gray now, and there were lines etched deep into his face, but his eyes were still that startling blue that had captivated her from the first moment she saw him. "No," she said firmly, "I do not miss it. This life, the one we built together, is everything I ever wanted, even when I did not know I wanted it." He kissed her, soft and sweet, and she kissed him back, feeling the familiar warmth that had never faded in all their years together. They had been through so much, overcome so many obstacles. But their love had never wavered, never dimmed. If anything, it had grown stronger with each passing year. That night, after the wedding guests had departed and Vara and Marcus had left for their new home, Grushka and Xander sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The farm was quiet, the only sound the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees and the distant call of an owl. "We did well, didn't we?" Xander said, breaking the comfortable silence. "We did," Grushka agreed. "We raised a daughter who is changing the world." We built a home that has become a sanctuary for those who believe in peace. We proved that love can overcome anything. We did all that, Xander said, but more than anything we found each other. And that, I think, was the greatest accomplishment of all. Grushka leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. The clan said come home or be nothing, she murmured. But I took your hand instead, and I became everything I was meant to be. They sat like that for a long time, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together in defiance of prejudice and fear. They had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them, Grushka felt a peace so profound it seemed to fill her from the inside out. She had made her choice all those years ago, and it had been the right one. She had chosen love over duty, hope over fear, and in doing so, she had found her true home. Not in the mountains where she was born, but here, in this small farmhouse on the frontier, with the man who had seen her when no one else would. With the family they had built together, the community they had fostered, and the legacy of peace they would leave behind. The orc woman had taken the farmer's hand, and together they had changed the world.